I'm Eric Wolf, and my experience in business peer groups has changed my life, especially my membership in Vistage, one of the world's largest CEO advisory groups. I'm an entrepreneur, a business owner, and a Vistage speaker on the power of marketing. This podcast is dedicated to the people who make those experiences possible, the peer group chairs. Every episode, I interview a Vistage chair who has dedicated their time to helping entrepreneurs like me succeed. Welcome to Chairwaves. My guest today is Mr. Dave Alden from the greater Philadelphia area. Welcome, Dave.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thanks.
Well, you're darn right. Um, your story is interesting because you came from the automotive industry initially in Detroit, and you subsequently uh, started your Vistage practice in Detroit, and then you said, "I don't want to be in Detroit anymore. I want to move to Philadelphia, family." Correct?
That's correct.
So you said, "I'm going to go to Philadelphia, and I'm going to restart my chairing practice there." I would love to hear. And I do want to get into your experience in the automotive industry and what led you to chairing in the first place. But I think a really interesting place to start would actually be, what was it like moving your chair practice, and what was that process like for you? I think that you're the first chair that I know that's done that.
Yeah, it's a little bit interesting, but let me give you a little bit of context. So you mentioned I was in the auto space, and so I worked for Ford Motor Company. I actually started in Philadelphia. Met my wife here at
Oh,
in a singles bar, not too far from
okay.
where we ended up living.
Okay.
And we moved 11 times in 32 years with the company. And so moving
Okay.
for us, it's never easy. However, when you do it a lot, and I moved 11 times, which also is associated with different roles, responsibilities, and different, even different divisions within the Ford Motor Company. So within all of that, taking on that challenge, I actually started the process a year or so before we actually moved. So I had an inkling, was this going to happen? Not to get too technical and too many details, though Vistage in Michigan is a licensee,
Correct.
and Vistage in Philadelphia is part of Worldwide, which is probably 95 or 99% of the overall business. And so I had an opportunity to look up, well, who was responsible for Vistage on the East Coast? And there's a guy, Lee Peters, was the vice president in charge of the East Coast, or at least the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast. And I told Lee that, hey, I may be interested in moving because we're working on some things with our family. And Lee was extremely gracious. And he found a place for me to interview with a chair that was transitioning out after 25 years of chairing. So that's how I began that move into Philadelphia from the Vistage standpoint.
That's really interesting. And so, you're from Philadelphia originally?
Nope, I'm from Boston originally. So
Okay.
things get complicated with all these
All
moves.
right.
Yeah, I'm a Bostonian, but I started my career with the Ford Motor Company in Philadelphia, a district sales office in Pensacola, New Jersey, calling on dealers as a young professional, working with them to sell them their products from the factory standpoint. So going in and meeting with business owners is something I started in my early 20s. And it's something that I continue to do today, obviously, with Vistage.
So you started in Boston. Tell me how you ended up in the auto industry, and what your early years were like.
Well, it's interesting these days. There's young people have a lot of resources to draw on. And I grew up in a family of business owners. My dad was a scrap metal dealer, and it didn't really have a whole lot of guidance. And so, what I decided to do at my senior year of undergraduate school is follow my passion. I'm a car nut. So I'm a car nut with a family with no money, and I figured I would be a car dealer. I didn't understand things about corporate world, and so I did a little research and on my own nickel flew from Boston to Detroit and interview with GM and Ford, and they both rejected me and said, "Son, you don't know anything a whole lot. I mean, in a nice way, but if you had an MBA, we'd consider you." So I went back and got an MBA and reapplied at Ford and GM and ended up at Ford.
And your role at that time, calling on dealerships, but what were you doing specifically?
So large companies at the time, a lot of companies did this. They had management training programs, rotational programs to develop their executives. And so that's what it was. So as you start out in the office, learn about the business in the office space, and the dealers need to uh, get their cars from somewhere, their new cars. And so you go in every month and you talk to them about their business. Hey, what's going on in business? How are things? You have so many in stock. How many do you think you're going to sell next month? And they tell you. And I said, well, how many do you want to have in stock? And so they tell you. And we got to go back and forth. And I said, well, we got some programs coming up that we're going to have a truck month, for instance, coming up in the next 60 days. So does that change the plan? And can I sell you a few more? Or can I sell you a few more of these that aren't really selling all that well, but I need to sell them and they have some that they really want? We used to say the difference between too many and too few in a dealer's lot is one. So we were always horse trading between too many and too few. And so there began my journey of spending time with mid-market business owners because that's what they were in those days. So the rules of the engagement was one family, one town. And of course, now if you look around, auto dealers are public companies, and you can go through a whole litany of people that own them. But in those days, that's what you did. Was a family had a dealership in town, and I was the guy that got it in my briefcase in my car and called on them.
That's really interesting. And you ended up working for Ford for, I guess the management program worked. You were there for more than 3 decades.
Yeah, 32 years.
That's incredible. That's longevity that you really don't see anymore.
Yeah, I know. We have four children, all gainfully employed, knock on wood, and they've have all changed jobs within several years. And matter of fact, I do one-to-ones with them, not unlike Vistage, once a week. And so they like to call me the dinosaur. But that Dad, you worked for a company for that long. That's definitely something nobody does these days, and it's true.
My The only person that I personally know that has had that kind of career in this day and age is actually my brother, who's worked for the New York City public school system, but of course he's unionized. So there are incentives for him to stay at a job um, that used to not be unique, but there are a few people that have that, and so to you might be part of the last generation that has this experience of saying, well, yeah, I started with Ford, they trained me, and I spent not your whole career, but really an entire career with this company. That's going to be a very rare thing in the future. So,
I would guess
um,
that.
yeah,
So one of the questions that a lot of members and prospective Vistage members ask me is, how the heck do you work? Because mostly entrepreneurs, founders, family members. So how did you work for one company for 32 years? How did you do that? I said it was easy, and I thought about this for a long time. You got to know how to take a punch. That's
there
it.
you go.
You know, yeah, it's exactly right. You got to pick your spots and understand exactly what is really important.
And if you, I mean, going back and looking at the world that you started your career in versus what young people have today, what do you think are the pluses and minuses of? Because I think there are pluses also to the way it is now, but I'd be curious on your perspective on that.
Well, I think today there's a lot more mobility. There's a lot more knowledge. So where could I get another job, and how do I actually figure out how to advance? There's more counseling, there's more mentorship today, and I think there's more entrepreneurship. I don't have all the facts, but starting a business, there's so much more capital available. I think that's readily apparent to a lot of people, and that helps the entrepreneurship. And so years ago, getting a loan, starting a business, convincing others to believe in you was much harder. It was a totally different system.
And it depended very much on who you knew. And now people are able to know a lot more people a lot more easily. So you had a taste of entrepreneurialism. You went to work for a startup after you were done with Ford. What was that like, and was that a culture shock for you?
Yeah, I say it was a startup within an established company. So it's not anywhere near what a lot of the Vistage members go through to have to get their own capital. But we did start up a business within a larger organization. And some of the things that were already apparent to me is when you also switch uh, careers and in functional. So going into logistics business, there's a lot of terminology and a lot of language in every business.
Oh, sure.
I was a bit lost when I first started. I wish I had spent more time in the assembly plant in the receiving area of the supplies and seeing how they're distributed within the assembly plant and delivered than I did. Because I learned a lot about that. And so it's a whole different learning curve. And you really learn it's not just about following somebody else's processes and procedures within a very much prescriptive process, but you got to make up the processes too. And then you got to find people to actually work with. And it's not it's not so easy to find. It's easy to put on a piece of paper a position description with skills and behaviors and all those kinds of things, but you got to go find those people and getting the perfect fit. Lot more trade-offs than you would imagine that I found anyway.
What ultimately led you to Vistage? When did that sort of come into your picture?
Well, Vistage specifically didn't, but I'll tell you what did, which was peer advisory groups.
Okay.
So in in the auto space, car dealers have historically got together in what's called 20 groups. Car dealers get together in groups of 20, but they're in the same industry, but in a different geographic location. So I specifically remember transitioning out of the Ford business. And one of the things I looked at, NADA, National Auto Dealers Association, is a big provider of these 20 groups. And I investigated, oh, that would be interesting to be a facilitator for one of these 20 groups because I had the opportunity to visit some of these through my career at Ford. And so sometimes they bring somebody in from that quote unquote the factory to provide a perspective or some kind of input on a topic or whatever. And so I always remembered that. And I thought that would be kind of a cool deal. And so then I went in the logistics business and I didn't know anything about Vistage, but my wife and I we're members of an Optimist Club, which is a service organization that helps kids. And so one of the members saw that I worked for Ford and had his own business, and he said, "Hey, I'd like to spend a little time with you. I want to do some sourcing in Southeast Asia." And if you looked at my background, we lived and worked 5 years in Bangkok, Thailand. So this guy Jeff at the end of the evening says, "So what are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm looking for something else to do." He said, "I'm a member of Vistage." And I go, "What's a Vistage?" And he said, and as soon as he told me, I go, peer advisory groups. This is what I totally get that. And so I went to a meeting. Then I interviewed with the owner, Dick Beadle of Vistage, Michigan, and Dick hired me. And so this was a classic day that he said, "You're hired." And I go, "Great." And I said, "So where's my starter group?" And he goes, "Dave," he looks
I got
out
good
the
news and bad news for you.
he looks out the window and points like Babe Ruth pointed when he hit his home run and said, "It's out there." And so that was the beginning of the journey.
What was that like for you?
Well, I have a marketing and sales background. So I said, I wasn't from Michigan. As I mentioned, I moved so many
Right.
times, but I said, okay, so what am I going to do? I said, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm just going to start talking to people. So here was my plan. Every day, I'm going to have a coffee with somebody. Didn't matter where they were in their career, or if they had no career, or they're unemployed. I just was committed to having coffee every day with somebody. And before you know it, one person could introduce you to another person. I mean, a lot of unproductive time, but I really enjoyed every conversation that I had with everybody that I spent time with. And that's one of the reasons I like doing the Vistage chairing. You just meet a lot of interesting people. So before you know it, you just begin slowly to turn that wheel. Got a couple of introductions, went to a marketing event or two, got a little bit of lucky, and that's how it all happens.
So we talked a little bit about then you and how long were you? You were a chair in Detroit for how long?
8.5 years or so.
What happened to where did you put your groups when you moved on?
Oh, it's interesting. So the owner at the time, Jane Beadle, found somebody that was really terrific and took over his two groups. And so I turned those over in Michigan. And I was talking to Brian recently, and I would say 70 or 80% of the groups are I had two CE groups and a advancing leaders group. But the two CE groups, I'd say 70, 80% still intact after the 3 years or so I've been here. So he's obviously a good selection, and I hear good things about him. But that's all part of the process.
And then you took over was it a CE group in
Yes.
Philadelphia from. So basically, it's not even you sort of got traded.
Yeah. Kind of. That's exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah, we went to Philadelphia, and I don't know who got the draft picks or anything like that, but um, so what was the process like? So um, you had built your own group, and obviously you would pick the people, and very often the culture of a group is comes from the chair. But then you go to Philadelphia after the trade, and now you're in front of somebody else's group that they had built and whose culture is a reflection of them in a way. What was taking over like for you? How hard was that?
Well, let me tell you two quick stories about that. So I took over, and remember, I'm from Michigan, but every year I went to what's called Chair World. You're
Yep,
familiar with that, of
I am
course.
very familiar.
And so I'd always see in Chair World that have recognition awards for chairs from around the country, but we weren't really part of it, so I didn't pay a lot of attention to it. So at this particular chair world, as soon as I came into Philadelphia, I'm sitting in the front row. I always like to sit in the front row at these chair worlds. And they're having what's called the Cope Award, which is probably the most prestigious award for a Vistage chair. And they introducing previous Cope Award winners before they announced that year's winner. And I look up, and there's Marty. And I'm going, oh man, I'm taking over a group from a Cope Award winner. And I'm going, my little sphincter started to really go, wow, I'm going to
Little
have
bit
to
of
be.
imposter syndrome.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. And so I put that together with to support what you said about the chair and the group. When a chair puts a group together, there's a lot of similarities. And so I do a lot with the disc profile. And so I would say 70% of my Michigan chair members had a similar profile to mine. I would say that 70% of my members from Marty's group that I took over had a different profile than mine,
Okay.
almost across the wheel. A lot more C, if you're familiar with DISC at all, of the conscientious belief system, and more of the driver element than on the right side, which is more of the uh, uh, personal side of the belief system. So, but that's all you do is you understand how that works, and then you meet members where they are anyway, and so you try to understand who people are. But it wasn't a perfect match. You know, there was one or two members that we just quite didn't click, I should say. But you know,
Right.
you can expect something like that, to be quite candid with you.
Absolutely. And well, sort of like if you're taking over somebody's company, there's going to be people who might not make it, not even because it's a bad match for you, but simply because people fundamentally don't like change. So yeah, that's completely natural that that sort of a thing would happen. Um, and so you're currently have two groups. You've got the CE group, and then you also do a Vistage Inside group, which is a very cool program that a lot of people don't know about. But basically, you go inside instead of the regular Vistage group, where you've got members from all these different businesses and industries. You're actually doing a Vistage group inside of a company with their leadership team. And so they all work at the same place. What's the what is the contrast for you? What's the in terms of the differences between the two groups? What stands out for you?
Uh, they are very different. So I like to say in the CE group that the members are the stars. So when you're facilitating a monthly member meeting, that it's all about the members. It's all about what where they're coming from, about what their thoughts and opinions are. And in the Vistage Inside group, you get to be able to be a little bit more of yourself in terms of being able to communicate your own personal narrative on for what we have developed, which is collaboration, strategic thinking, and communication. So you can put a little bit more of your own self into that because there is more of the teaching element in that. You don't teach as part of it being a Vistage chair. And so it's very rewarding to watch your senior leadership team, the lights start to go on certain situations that with collaboration and communication on how to get things done, for instance, outside of their direct area of influence. And so I'd say that's really it. Here's one other thing that's most interesting. Meeting starts at 8 o'clock with coffee and conversation. And at 8:01 at the Vistage Inside group, the chairs are full. 8:01 at the chief executive,
You're
they are
correct.
still drifting in.
You are correct, and some people might not show until 10 o'clock. Some people, and they're going to leave at 2. Um, how do you? One of the things we that I hear from a lot of chairs and that we talk about a lot is the importance of vulnerability and emotional safety in the room. Now, I imagine that at some companies that takes a little bit of work with a Vistage Inside group. So I go to my Vistage group and I can talk about somebody that's absolutely destroying me at work. And the people in the room are never going to meet that person. They're never going to run across this problem client maybe that I'm dealing with or problem vendor that I'm dealing with. But at the Vistage Inside group, when if people start talking about folks, the other people in the room know who they are. There's how do you how do you create an environment where people feel safe to share those thoughts and in a way where they're not going to be afraid of retribution or bad politics or anything like that, things that happen inside of companies.
Yeah, I think I handle that a little differently. I think I've worked hard so that the Vistage Inside members have trust in me for confidentiality. So those difficult conversations, and there's a lot of them, because
Yeah,
there's a lot of supervisors that, let's just say are not on the top of their game. I handle that in the one-to-ones. So we don't handle those things in open meetings. We're more
gotcha.
to stay focused on collaboration, strategic thinking, and communication. And we'll get into some situations. And there is in no instance are we really making anything personal in the open meeting. But in my one-to-ones, absolutely, for sure.
What's the most gratifying part for you of having a Vistage Inside group?
Watching people grow, watching the lights go on, handling a situation, and something happens, and then I turn it back. Okay, well, what are your thoughts? What's your best thought on here? What would you do? And people begin to call on some of the things that we've talked about in the group, especially from our speakers. Man, we have some amazingly just great workshops and speakers, and so I'm able to draw on those. And and when a member in the group uh, takes a lesson and applies it in the conversation, that's very gratifying.
What's you've been a chair now for, I guess, over 10 years
Yeah,
or
11
11
years.
years. So, in 11 years, what is the most valuable lesson that chairing has taught you?
Oh, there's several of these, and but I'm going to tell you, it just makes you a better person. Why does it make you a better person? Because it helps you be more empathetic. It helps you understand that a lot of times you don't really understand the problem. And so jumping to conclusion and rushing to provide input when nobody asked you, or providing your judgment when, again, nobody asked you,
Right.
uh, is it just makes you a better person. You become a better listener and a better but just know more about yourself. I always say to my members, what is leadership? It's a journey of self-awareness. And so being a Vistage chair just supercharges your own self-awareness.
That is terribly insightful. Thank you. Um, what's the best way if folks want to have questions about your groups, if they have questions about the auto industry and um, or about your chair practice, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Well, you can always get in touch with me through my email, david.alden at vistagechair.com, or you can just go on LinkedIn and you'll see me in my LinkedIn profile. And you can always click on that and be in contact. And you see a little bit about me. I've got some reviews and some things that are important to me. And a little more importantly, a lot about my members. And so try to I do some interviews myself, not at this length, but just very short little snippets on, as I call it, solutions to problems that keep business owners and CEOs up at night, because that's a lot of what Vistage is really all about, being a resource.
Absolutely. And thank you for being a great resource today. Thank you for being a great guest. I really appreciate it.
Oh yeah, it was fun. Nice talking to you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Chairwaves. You can subscribe to our feed using Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your platform of choice. You can also visit chairwaves.com for more information. Chairwaves is hosted and produced by me, Eric Wolf, and to connect with me, you can visit my website at ewolf.live. That's EWOLF.live. And a disclaimer, while I love Vistage and CEO peer groups, this podcast is not owned by or affiliated with Vistage or any other peer organization. Thanks for listening.